Hello, today is Friday, October 11th, and welcome to episode 371 of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you quickly up to speed 3 times a week on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. I'm NSI Senior Fellow Morgan Vina, and I'm joined today by NSI CTC Fellow Jeffrey Wells, NSI CTC Senior Fellow Matt Hayden, and my fellow Senior Fellow Amy Mitchell. Today, we are discussing the decision by the United Kingdom to hand over sovereignty of the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. For those of you asking the Chago what and where, the Chagos Islands are part of an archipelago located in the central Indian Ocean, east of Madagascar, and about 1,000 miles south of India. The UK, after decades of control, which has been disputed by international parties, i.e. the UN, agreed to hand over the islands to Mauritius. But it will continue to retain control of the jointly held UK-US Diego Garcia military base for an initial period of 99 years. Supporters of the decision, including the White House, herald this as a historic agreement, which they argue ensures the legal status of the base, which had come under scrutiny. Critics, however, argue that this decision is a strategic blunder, offering up the islands on a platter to China, which has fostered very close ties to Mauritius. Diego Garcia, of course, is very important to U.S. strategic interests. The base is critical for U.S. air and naval operations across the Indo-Pacific, and in particular, support of the B-1B Lancer long-range bomber deployments. Additionally, the site's naval support facility offers logistical support for forces operating in and around the Persian Gulf and the Indian Ocean. It hosts a maritime pre-positioning squadron, as well as detachments from the U.S. Fleet and Industrial Supply Center, Air Mobility Command, Pacific Air Force, and the 21st and the 22nd Space Operations Squadrons. Amy, turn to you first. When you and I were serving at DoD, Diego Garcia was a very hot topic, one that was highly classified, and many of an interagency meeting was held on the topic. What do you make of this decision, and how is it going to affect U.S. interests?
Thanks, Morgan, first of all. This is typical of the Biden administration, where they want to herald diplomatic wins that really only matter in their minds to their kind of fellow Western intellectuals in Europe and the UN. But the reality is we continue to lose our over-the-horizon view by giving up all these spaces. First, we had Afghanistan, where we had, eyes east to China, west to Iran, north to Russia. And now we're doing the same here. And, opponents will say, well, it's a 99-year lease. Well, I mean, leases that we do when our next door neighbor is going to be China are going to be bad. Look at the Panama Canal and what's happened there. Look at Hong Kong, as Jeffrey's going to talk about. So, this administration wants to herald this as a diplomatic win, but it's really a loss for the United States, especially when we start talking about if there is a conflict with China and the logistics and supply chain of trying to move materials and people through the Pacific.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jeffrey, as Amy mentioned, my former colleague, Luke Coffey, who's now at the Hudson Institute, recently compared this deal to the UK's handing over of Hong Kong to the Chinese, noting just the disastrous consequences of a similar arrangement. Is this comparison fair?
Yeah, it's a fair comparison, and I think someone can fact check me here, but I think it was Thucydides who wrote that the strong do what they can, and the weak must suffer what they must. And this is a complete strategic ineptitude and a win for China and for Russia, and that this is not about the decolonization of the islands and ceding it back to the displaced Chagosians. In fact, they weren't even mentioned in this agreement. That Mauritius here was able to leverage international law with the help of the UN and Russia. And I think that this continues to set precedent, much like Hong Kong, and perhaps other key strategic positions around the world around territorial claims that are going to be more vulnerable to exploitation, and we're going to continue to see our position be boxed into, from a military perspective and from a strategic perspective, into into a very small area. The U.S. must now navigate its reliance on Mauritius, their decisions complicating our defense and intelligence activities in the region. Handing over this, the Chinese are certainly going to exert influence, and our operational security is going to be exposed to a host of surveillance activities by the Chinese, not to mention the logistics as a whole, and thinking about the infrastructure on the island that is probably going to be taken over by Chinese, and putting in dual use infrastructure, threatening our power projection and capabilities in the region, as well as those of the UK, which are good friends. And I just, I think, as Amy said, this is, the soft power win here is going to quickly evaporate, and hard power is going to come down really hard in the Indo-Pacific region, especially on the US, UK, and our partners in the region.
Yeah. Thanks, Jeffrey. Matt, turning to you, I want you to build on top of this, but also if you can sort of expand a little bit on the following. We've got a presidential election coming up. President Biden is not running, right? He's a lame duck. And so any sort of follow on from this decision will take place under a new administration, whether that is former President Trump or Vice President Kamala Harris. So welcome your thoughts as to what this decision means and how it might play out under a new administration.
Yeah, and no matter which administration we're talking about, they now have to deal with a blueprint, just as Jeffrey alluded, to taking on some of our other positions across the Pacific Ocean, across areas. I mean, there's people who do not want us at Guantanamo Bay and will have the same style of concern and approach to try and get that strategic landing zone and functional base out of our hands. I mean, you're going to start to see people, and people being the international community of Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea, they're the regulars, all wanting to voice up that we don't need this strategic power. We don't need the strategic dominance in this area. And then that's absolutely what has to be pushed back upon. So this is going to be looked on with a 100-year lease as something that we have a clock turned over on. At the same time, it lowers our security posture. And the new administration is going to have to both recognize that and make sure that the rest of our strategic endpoints don't have this same challenge in the future.
All right. Well, that's a wrap. No fault lines today. Thanks so much to Devin Burning, Claude Jennings, and the NSI staff for helping and producing today's episode. Join us again on Monday, October 14th, for another episode of Fault Lines, the National Security Institute's podcast that gets you smart fast on the national security and foreign policy debates shaking up America. Fault Lines is now on YouTube, so check out our channel for a video of today's episode. If you like what you heard or saw, be sure to rate, review, and subscribe.